Happy Jack's RPG Podcast. I'm in Max. Pursuing the RPG hobby with reckless abandon.
Sweet. Hi, guys. Welcome to the Happy Jack's RPG Podcast. I'm always off my cue, and I'm your moderator for tonight. I'm your stand-in stew, Abria, and we have a very special episode for you. Ooh. We're going to talk about people of color in the gaming space and diversity and all of those really interesting things that we strive to show within our games and ethically, but might be a little uncomfortable to talk about. So we are your panel of friendly people of color here to help and answer questions. So we actually have a couple submissions, but first, let's introduce everyone.
Hi, I'm Jim.
Pooja.
Hey, Jay, how are you?
Nice. Awesome. So yeah, let's just jump into it. Who wants to read the first email?
Oh, okay, yeah. I have it open, so I'm going to read it.
Oh, hold on. I haven't finished introing anything properly. It's like I don't even go here. Let's try. All right. From
Who
the
are
top.
these people? What is this room we're in? I don't understand.
Okay, so in this episode, Elderman writes about fantasy races in RPGs and how they're bad. Fredericks writes in about portraying PCs of color, and Eric writes in about his gaming group's lack of diversity. So here's an everyday question also. Bobcat asks about a good scenario for first-time players. And don't forget, please send in all of your questions to us at happyjacksrpg@gmail.com, and we can put you up and talk about you on future episodes of the podcast. Don't forget to follow us on social media at happyjacksrpg on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and MeWe, which I still am not confused. I don't know what that is. Do you know what it is?
I have no idea.
Okay, well.
All right, cool.
So you won't be talking to any of us on MeWe.
You won't.
There will
There'll
be
be
other
someone.
people.
There's
There'll be
someone.
other people.
I'm going to make one joke, and it's my one for the thing, and I'm pretty sure it's white nonsense. I don't think it's real. We asked the panel of the only black people in RPG games, and we've not heard of it. So. All right, that was one bad joke, and please don't at me later.
That was the one. That's the only really.
I know.
It
was a wasted opportunity. Oh, shit. On blast. Okay. All right. Who wants to start off by reading?
Okay, so yeah. I mean, I've got it open, so
Yes.
Do it.
as I am the only one on the correct page.
Yep.
We are so prepared.
So prepared.
Yeah.
Okay.
So better prepared.
All right.
Fantasy races and RPGs, they're bad. From Elderman. Hello, Happy Jacks. I was listening to your response to Eric about playing a bigot in Season 23, Episode 17. The discussion touched on fantasy races and role-playing games. For what it's worth, I thought you guys approached a delicate topic well. As well as we're going to? I don't think so. Fantasy races and RPGs have been bothering me more and more as I've returned to the hobby as an adult. Bit by bit, I'm getting clearer in my head about why, and I'd like to share my thoughts. I don't know if y'all want to share this email on your show, but I'm okay if you do, which is good, because we're totally sharing it.
Sharing the crap out of it.
I appreciate Kimmy's point that RPGs offer a safe way to talk about racism. I've used RPGs that way myself. However, I still think fantasy races are bad in role-playing and should change, and I want to try and convince you of why. The basic point is the one Stu made, that fantasy races offer a way of making it comfortable to think in a bigoted way.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I'm just one guy, but it seems to me that the first thing to keep in mind about race is that, biologically speaking, it just doesn't exist. Race is a social construct. That doesn't make it less real, but it means that race doesn't mean the same thing in every place, at every time, or to every person. In the real world, white doesn't mean the same thing in New York, in Marseille, in Tokyo, in Port Moresby? I don't know if I pronounced that correctly. I've never heard of it before. And in Nairobi. It doesn't mean the same thing to me and to my brother. The same goes for black or any other racial category. If you don't want to take my word for this, it would be difficult to convince you succinctly, but for example, there are members of my family who are white in India and black in the USA. However, in RPGs with fantasy races, race is a rule established by the game system. Maybe not in all of them, but in most popular RPGs, an elf is an elf, a human is a human, a dwarf is a dwarf, An orc is an orc to every person throughout the world. Their racial identity isn't constructed, it's a fact on the character sheet or in the stat block. The category dwarf doesn't change according to whether you're in Waterdeep or Winterkeep. That version of race is the opposite of the truth, and it gets the most important thing wrong. Furthermore, thinking about race as an essential fact of the universe is a racialized way of thinking. It's how racists think. It's also how that little part in each of us that is a little racist imagines the world. It seems to me that thinking this way doesn't make you a racist in a pejorative sense, but it certainly is racist in the sense that it puts people into imaginary racial categories. So when an RPG presents a character's race as an immutable part of their identity, instead of as a box imposed on them by society, they invite you to think in a racist way. In order to play the game, you have to treat race as real in a way that real-world racial identity can never be real. Since the first thing to keep in mind about race, in this man's opinion, is the fact that it's an artifact of society, not a law of the universe, and since this most important thing is false in an RPG world, RPGs falsify the nature of race. This means that, for me, when fantasy races enter the mix, Kimmy and Tappy's idea of taming racism through play results in taming the wrong idea of racism. It encourages a player to get comfortable with race as an innate characteristic, and that's something we should never get comfortable with simply because it's wrong. It's an idea that's factually incorrect and morally reproachable. This is specifically a problem with fantasy races because elf, dwarf, orc, or human is often one of the first things you identify about a player character, and it's baked in the mechanics of many game systems. I still agree with Kimmy and Tappy and Eric that RPGs can be a great, safe way to explore difficult ideas. I played in a session of Dream Askew last weekend that was really eye-opening. RPGs can help us all learn more empathy, and they can be a good way to explore racism too. But fantasy races are a racist fantasy. All caps. Not all caps, but all the words were capitalized. At least in all the games I've ever played or read. How can RPGs do better? I'm so glad you asked. I hope you have an answer, because I'm leaving that to you.
Oh,
Elderman.
all right.
P.S. That was heavy going, for me at least. Drink.
Oh, I have a drink. There we go.
P.P.S. Boring disclaimers. I don't particularly know any more about this topic than the ordinary layman. I don't want to put myself out there as an expert. I've never taken a college course on the topic. I don't read books about racism. So maybe what I'm saying here is bad and wrong in some way I can't see. I'm just writing based on my own thoughts and based on my own life experiences, which have included more than the average amount of international travel. Plus, I've read a lot of game books.
Okay.
Cool.
Well, welcome to that club.
Nice.
All right.
Yeah.
Sweet. I just want to come out of the gate and say I appreciate the attempts to not only couch your own experiences while explaining how you understand race, but I think there's a lot of really salient points here as far as understanding of race being D&D is a very colonizer game. It's something of conquest and categorization and othering things so that you can mentally justify
Killing
them
them
and
and
taking their stuff.
We were actually just having
Yeah.
this conversation
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
couple of minutes before we started the podcast, where kind of everybody's first D&D campaign is how do we kill this and take its stuff, or how do we get by this so we can take its stuff? If we can't kill it,
Right.
how do we sneak past it to take its stuff? So it's not people's first experiences with D&D are often how best do we kill all the things?
Right. Well, D&D is derived from very Tolkien-esque fiction. Well, he sort of established this kind of high fantasy fiction.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And the Tolkien world that he built is based sort of as an aftermath of world wars that were very racially charged and were also you saw the rise of fascism, which if you can't get more racist than that, and it's a reflection of that culture and that world that he lived in.
Also, British imperialism. Let's not
Yes.
forget.
Let's not forget
He's
British
so British
imperialism.
and he's never forgotten it.
No.
Sorry.
Let's never forget that the sun did finally set on the British Empire.
Yeah.
It most definitely
It is set in the game's DNA.
Yeah, exactly.
And he brought that up, and that's actually a fact. When you first say, I'm playing a dwarf fighter, the first word that comes in the descriptive part of it is dwarf. So you're saying that's part of the character's identity, and it's part of what a major part of what he is, and it's not sort of like this is the person and this is what he does, which is how we want to evaluate people on a general basis based on their own merits.
But, I mean, I'd argue this about D&D, and this thing that he brings up here, is that there's kind of a lighting of a thing with the term race.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That, like, when you're talking about D&D, you're really talking about different species.
Yes.
of creature.
Species.
Yes.
And that was my biggest takeaway in terms of like when you try to align real world race with fantasy role playing game race, we're not actually talking about the same race at all.
No.
We are talking about race versus species.
Right, exactly. And it allows, because of that, it allows like a different sort of institutional or like built-in racism creep in, which is that like everyone makes a white person if they're human.
Yes.
Somehow all the
God,
humans
yes.
are almost always white and pretty Nordic.
Oh, so
and
Nordic.
So it just makes like it allows you to like revert to a white human as normal.
Yeah.
But
Right.
you know, a green orc is a green orc, and it's just like I feel like that's more the trick than worrying about a half dwarf or whatever.
Yeah.
Because like it'd be like being a half horse. If my dad was a horse and my mom was a person, I would be a half a horse.
That's a
It'd be
centaur.
weird.
That's called a
Well,
centaur.
the one
That's
thing
not how
name-
centaurs are made, though.
Wait, but do you know that for sure?
I'm pretty sure that's
Have you
not how
tried
I have not tried it. No.
experiment heavily. But the only game that I remember that actually had a half dwarf, they were called mules. Because they were
Yikes.
moles.
Right.
Yeah.
But because they couldn't reproduce on their own. It was basically just like a jackass.
Yeah.
But
That doesn't make it any better.
doesn't make it any better. But
Nope.
I'm just saying it's really fucked up and interwoven with a lot of shit. Because you're absolutely right. An elf is of a completely different species than a human being. There's a genetic divergence not only culturally but as in their physicality. They're basically immortal. Yada yada yada. Does that really count as a race, or does it count as a species? And does it really have ramifications in the way that we think? Yes, it does. And just like what you said, because it normalizes a certain type of thought.
Right,
Because
yeah.
you're making correlations versus with what you see, with what you expect, and that causes basically a cognitive predisposition. That's sort of the key of racism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. And that's not to say, like, I mean, there are definitely issues with, especially how in Tolkien's universe, different races, heavy quotation marks, so
Yeah.
species are portrayed.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
like
The
so
descriptive terms?
problematic, so problematic.
Yeah.
But like without, opening myself up for a whole world of internet hate right now, like let's just agree that there was some shit in the 50s that was really bad that's not acceptable now. We can all say like that wasn't cool
Yeah.
Yes.
and move on.
Yeah.
We're
But
evolving.
the problem is, like, when you talk about a system like the gaming systems that most of us play and most of us started out with, that those problematic elements are actually baked in. So even, in my opinion, more than that race is a social construct and therefore fantasy species should be a social construct as much as that, it's that, to me, that, like, we have baked in these kind of racist allegories between these fictional species and real-world racist precepts
Yes.
that we then bring forward every time we play.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I guess that was, in a way, sort of my point. That like, while there are problematic things built into a lot of fantasy systems and a lot of the way we think about it, a lot of the racist is what we're bringing to the table, and like the system just sort of allow the racist concepts just to filter right in. Like, it'd be interesting to and I've tried to approach it. Like, I don't play a lot of D&D. I've mostly played. I mean, honestly, I've mostly played games here, so it's been a lot of Powered by the Apocalypse, which is a lot more sort of open. But it's,
yeah, so much more open.
yeah. But it's interesting approaching D&D, and as I'm playing it now, trying to approach it from the place of race is a social construct. These are different species, so even within species, there can and should be racial sort of differences. There's also class to mess around with, like to try to
class.
approach
Whoa,
that
yeah.
that system with a more open mind and see if it still functions.
Well, there's also aspects of sexism in it too,
Oh.
because dwarves are considered to be towards the masculine scale, and elves are considered to be towards the feminine scale. I remember when I was playing in my mid-teens, and I wanted to play an elf character. There was some like, that's gay. I'm like, no, it's just an elf. He's a badass, dude. What are you talking about?
And I think a lot of what goes, like all of this, all like super cogent points. I just want to jump really quickly back to like ideas on race as a social construct. Like I totally agree, but with the caveat that like, I don't know, you said you haven't read a lot of books on race. I'm going to recommend Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of understanding. There's an interesting term he uses, which is people who must think of themselves as white. And like I think it was just like a random recommendation before I forgot, because I wrote a little note and I know we're gonna flip a page in a second. That it's just an interesting meditation on like race and how that informs worldviews. Because like the baggage that we're bringing into, especially as people of color, like, and I'm not trying to like shade D&D, but like because it is the clearest like successor of like Tolkien is
And like,
high fantasy.
and let's be real, like D&D is the gateway drug of
Yeah.
like random number I'm pulling out of my ass. 95% of role playing, like people who play role playing games.
Yeah.
D&D and Pathfinder are definitely the center core of the role-playing hobby, and usually the
And
introduction
Pathfinder was an
people get-
offshoot of D&D.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So it's just a really interesting like ground right now where a lot of battles on social justice theory and like traditionalist gaming have kind of come to meet. Like there's a lot of like stuff about like people who play tieflings should like be fine with like, don't try to like make your tiefling different or special, like lean into the like racial bonuses and stuff, like because they're like super traditionalist and like all tiefling have to deal with like the evil racism of the world and that's good and fine. And there's a whole
Oh my God.
weird camp of people who justify it because it's just part of a game. So the fact that like
But
This-
one thing, like, sorry.
No, you're
I
good.
feel like I'm interrupting so much. I'm sorry about that.
You're a monster. You're fine. Go.
Oh, good.
Like, in terms of, like, when you want to break out of those kind of racial tropes and species tropes that were set up as, like, you know, guidelines and basic, like, broad... The thing about a player's handbook, and I feel like we a lot of times will approach a system and kind of that's your Bible. You treat it as a gospel and you treat it as the end all be all.
Yes.
However, this is a world that y'all are crafting. Like you as a GM or you as a player and like y'all together make these worlds. And by thinking, like making a conscious effort to break out of those constraints that are set up, like each of these species, each of these races could have like a whole variety of culture.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times, like, where we think about race in the real world is coming out of like a sense of culture as well.
Right.
So it's not just black, white, brown
Right.
in your various shades. That we've got like this whole breadth of culture in the world to draw from, and I feel like we minimize that a lot in our role-playing games because you have to start somewhere and you have to get stuff that actually fits in like a book that is, you know, publishable and people can afford to buy it. But instead of treating your player's guide as a holy grail, treat it as like
a guideline.
a guideline or like one of those, like a writer's prompt.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But I do think, I mean, to come at this, and I'm sure this is going to come up later, there's also the fact that, like, I would have to say the majority of gamers are white and have grown up in a world where they have not had to consider race.
Yes.
And not had
Oh,
to
yeah.
think about all of those sort of implications. And there is sort of a built-in the sort of built-in old ways of thinking about race that are part of a lot of game systems, particularly D&D, but other ones as well. There's going to be sort of a natural, like, if you're sitting at a table of all white people, you're going to sort of approach it in a same way and
Yeah.
approach your concepts of race in the same way that is like a thing you have to work against, a thing you have to, like, as a player or as a DM, design your game, like, be conscious of.
Yeah.
You know?
It's definitely like it's about mindfulness.
Right.
In the end.
I think also it's about depth, because when you create a very shallow reflection of something, that's when it becomes problematic. When I just see you as a black person or I see you as a white person, that's where we start getting into issues, because I'm going to start presupposing things about. Now, when you give some cultural depth to these races, let's give Dragonlance, for example. There are hill dwarves, gully dwarves, mountain dwarves. There are a lot of different dwarves, and they are all very different culturally.
Yeah.
So you actually have a diversity within that one species, within that they have races within themselves, and they become a richer, deeper sort of thing for you to explore as a player and as a GM. So when you give those things depth, when you actually start exploring your world and building it with detail and with some kind of consciousness that you want things to be reflected, and you want your players to play in a diverse playground with a lot of different types of people, I think that's one of the things where role-playing games can give you empathy, and it requires a higher level of imagination and a higher level of work on your part to create these things that are a little bit more three-dimensional and aren't just glossed over as one thing or another. And that's what I try to do in my fantasy world, is I always try to give that little depth.
Absolutely.
I love Conan, so I always try to build worlds that have tons of different cultures, people that look radically different, and you can choose to be a player from any one of those things. I mean, I'm the only GM I know of that's consistently had players play human characters of different colors and races within my games.
Nice.
Because I created a world where that was an option.
Yeah.
And a lot of and you look at a lot of these games and a lot of these modules, that the closest thing you come to that is like a drow elf and an elf. There's not a lot of variance. There's not a lot of variance between all of these.
We have other letters to get to.
All right. So
No, not for you. I meant for the drow.
Yeah.
But when you start treating things like things actually function in a real world, instead of creating a fantasy that tries to limit things to tropes and certain things that are only familiar to the people at the table, there's less to explore, and there's less for you to become connected to in a game. And I think that's also a life lesson. The more you learn about everything around you and the people around you, the better off you're going to be, because you're going to build empathy, and empathy is the core of getting along with people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And one sentence like solve for your problem is untether race from your stat bonuses.
Yep.
Just don't let that be the thing.
Yep.
Like tie them more deeply to background and class choices. Like
Oh yeah, absolutely.
if you have a smart background and then your class makes you smarter, because like the longer you do any job, the better you get at doing it. So just don't make it a race thing.
Right.
Cool.
Or untether race from species.
Yes.
To even further expand your sort of sense that your race can be dragonborn,
Yeah.
or your species can be dragonborn, but your race can be any number of things. Or even within elf, your race can be so many things, and like really consciously, like there should of course be elves of color.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like why would there not be?
Are there no elves that developed near the equator where there's lots of sun? I don't.
There are in my game.
Yeah, like just sort of.
I
like
mean,
to
it's just a
expand
thing.
that.
It's like,
Exactly.
Exactly.
expand your world. You
Yeah.
have the power.
Yes.
In the very final analysis, your game is a reflection of more of you than the material that you use to play with.
Absolutely. Sweet. All right. Good. I think we handled that one pretty well.
Hey.
Yay. All right.
Damn straight we did.
We have another email. Who would like to read it?
I'll go ahead and read it. Portraying PCs of color, Fredericks. Hi, JOCs, Jackers of Color.
I wanted to go with jocks.
Jocks.
And then you get
Jocks.
shirts that are jock jam.
Oh,
yeah.
that's what I'm talking about.
Doing it.
Let me tell you a story. A year ago or so, I had an opportunity to play a great character in Vampire the Masquerade 20th Anniversary Edition. He was a human rights attorney with a street gang childhood who, as a vampire, had a herd. I loved the irony of drinking from his herd while trying to defend human rights. That is actually great. He was black, and in one scene there, where someone from his street, quote unquote, catches up with him. I tried speaking in a different style, not accent. I generally don't do accents because I'm crap at accents. Think Stringer Bell in The Wire. Immediately, I felt uncomfortable. It was like I was putting on the RPG equivalent of blackface.
You were a little bit. Let's keep going.
And it felt wrong. Good on you that at least
on
you
you.
had the
Yeah.
insight.
You blocked it. Good job.
Yeah,
That's half the
yeah,
battle.
yeah. You know what?
It's kind of more than half the battle. It's a lot of the battle.
No, the battle is, no, it's fine. Now, this isn't just about race, but class too. Note, I hadn't been worried about playing the lawyer/vampire side of his life. It only happened when he put on his street act. So afterwards, I talked with the, for context, all-white mixed gender sexuality group about my discomfort and said that next time I'd try playing in the social constructs I knew and was part of as a Londoner. I could do South London gangster more comfortably than Milwaukee gangster, as I was more comfortable, but now I felt I was denying the character's blackness. As it turned out, life changes meant I had to let the game go, but I must say it was with no small sense of relief at no longer having to tackle playing that character. Since then, I have read Chris Spivey's excellent advice in Harlem Unbound, but I would be keen to hear what the teams take on and advice for white folk playing characters of color. Fredericks on the forums.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What a good one.
Question for point of clarity.
Yes.
I don't know how Vampire the Masquerade works. Are there preset characters that you are assigned?
No.
No.
So he created this character?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Whole cloth, including like
Okay.
background and stuff. Yeah, I got you, fam.
Yeah.
You start. I got you.
I was like,
I'm not saying you guys are gonna sit out on this,
no, but yeah.
Yeah.
But
just
yeah.
give us a second.
Frederick, thank you for the question.
Yeah,
thank
for
you
sure.
for the intention. And there are a lot of things you say right here, but one, I am going to ding you on the passive voice.
Yep.
You created this character. You created a black character. And I think, when if you're going to create a character of color, you have to have thought about this stuff first.
Yes. Absolutely.
And I would definitely not recommend. One, I'd not recommend using an accent
yeah.
ever.
Roll one.
That's sort of rule one. And two, it's interesting you point out a South London gangster and feeling like that takes away from his blackness. But you also reference Stringer Bell, who is super, super, super British in real life. And so there are British and British-speaking people of color. So
Quick fun fact: I just read today, London is 40% people of color.
Yeah.
So
Thank you, Great British Empire.
yeah.
So
It's all good. Good.
It's entirely possible that you could be a South London gangster and speak like a South London person and also be black.
Yes.
Two things, not mutually exclusive.
Yes.
It's also perfectly fine to be black and speak Spanish, because
Yes.
there's
Yeah, so many.
so many.
So many.
It's also, I mean, I'm just going to throw this out there because I can't not. I'm sorry if I'm stealing anyone's thunder. You can be a black person without like a street background.
What?
So that's the big thing I want to touch on. So I think the most important thing here is to examine why you wanted to play a black person to start with. So if you had an idea of someone with a street background, like making good and then becoming like a lawyer and human rights activist, was the choice to be black informed by the street background or vice versa? Because then, like, what is actually happening with your character creation is you are using the shorthand of black to explain street, and now you've tied those two, like, stereotypes together in a really uncomfortable way. And that's, like, a thing you clocked. Because you could absolutely be a South London gangster and black. And maybe if you never ever mention what the character looks like, that character's just black and no one noticed, and like that's kind of the goal.
Yeah.
Is that like
Yep.
you don't have to draw attention. Like the blackness is not a point for you to like ding off on the list of things to do, because there's a higher likelihood of you like hitting a bunch of tropes on your way to creating a black character.
Right. And I appreciate, like, I'm always of two minds about this thing, because there's definitely a knee-jerk part of me that says, just don't do that. Just don't create a character of another color, but it really limits it. I appreciate the effort to be like, I want to diversify my game. I don't want everyone in my game to be lily white.
Yeah.
I want to bring some color, but it is really, if you're going to do that, thinking about ways that you yourself can fulfill that part.
Yeah.
And do that role.
And one thing, like, when I was reading this letter, it sounded like to me from the letter and some of the spellings might have been that, like, okay, so Fredericks is a Londoner, and that's why you were more and like your game was set in Milwaukee, or
Yes.
you know,
Or
like, or your game was set somewhere in the States, maybe you're in the States now and you grew up in London or whatever that is. Like, I'm projecting a lot of backstory onto you right now. But that, like, making sure that you do some homework when you're creating these characters, that, like, it's the same kind of homework that you would do with any other character that you would do, but, like, making sure that the choices that you make are informed by, like, real character decisions and some respect and, like, understanding of, like, people of color as human beings.
Yeah.
Rather than just stereotypes. Because, like, we all see these things, like, and we pull characters to roleplay all the time that are, like, you know, fan cast from the world around us,
totally.
and, like, from cinematic universes and stuff, and, like, that's all well and good. Like, we're like, man, I really want to play, like, Arya in this particular game. But, like, what we need to, I think, be cognizant of when we do that kind of thing, where we, like, kind of pull an archetype or pull a trope from, or a character from the media that we see around us, is that so often for people of color, we are reduced to stereotypes in the media.
Yes.
Like, whether that's the, you know, your smart Asian, your, you know, also subservient and quiet Asian, your, you know, gangster black person, your, you know, like,
Drug dealer.
your
Hispanic
drug
person.
dealer,
Yeah.
your drug dealer made good.
Yeah.
Like, your, like, I've raised myself, you know, person of color who's, like, you know, risen above their station, those kinds of things. Like, you need to really look and examine the tropes that you're using.
Well, when Hispanics get a +2 to drug dealing, what are you going to do?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's like, it's really kind of horrific. But I'm not saying that that's what you necessarily did here, but just that if you want to play a person of color, and that's actually something that I feel strongly that people should do, is play races outside their own.
Yeah.
But just when you're making these characters, make sure that you've stepped outside of the tropes that have been imposed upon us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I think that there's a difference between playing a character of color versus playing a character that happens to be of a different race. Now, I mean, really, if I would have, if how do I put this without being a dick?
Go be a dick.
Go
be
be
a
a
dick.
No, it's if I've only ever played one black character in my life as a role player, and I've played hundreds of characters. And he was from North Africa, and he was an international assassin guy, and he was mostly brought
from
up in Europe.
Morocco?
He was from Morocco.
Ah!
Called it. Really bad at
No,
geography.
he's from Algiers. But
Lied
Well,
to me. You
I
could just
mean-
let the lie go.
So was he black or North African?
he was North African, and I do understand that there's a
legitimately
difference
different.
between
Yep.
being
Yeah.
black and North African. But I literally played him. There were no decisions or anything that I did, or roleplay decisions or characterization decisions that I made because of his race. I just played him as a guy that had the background that I developed
Yeah.
for him, and happened to have a physique that was North African black.
Yeah.
So I literally played somebody that was of color, but I didn't really do anything. I didn't attack any tropes. I literally played him as if he were any other color that I would have picked. If he was from Spain and Spanish, I would have played him exactly the same way. There was no times where I go, oh, and he does this thing that's kind of like this thing I saw in this music video. Never did that. But
Never do that.
Good.
Never
Just
do
never
that.
do
that
that.
thing.
never do that. But the thing is that I played a person that was had dark skin versus playing a black person as a caricature.
Yeah.
You know, and that one goes into the basis of when you think of people as just people and don't try to draw on your predisposition towards whatever thing you have. That's okay. But when you start playing around with what you think these tropes are, and when you start experimenting with that, that's when you're actually trying to be insulting, because you don't know what these people have been through, and you don't know what it's like to be different consistently all the time.
I'm just going to go back and say that is definitely what I said earlier, just for the record. that, like, it's the idea of you can absolutely just play a character that happens to be of a race.
Right.
Yeah.
And it may come up as a thing that is noticed or remarked upon. Side note, if you're ever going to, we've talked about this.
Oh, yeah.
If you ever describe someone's skin tone, please avoid food comparisons.
Yes.
It's so weird. We're not chocolate.
Oh.
Anyway.
My skin is not the color of chai.
Oh.
It's definitely not the color of chai tea.
Oh, God.
Oh, I never even heard that.
So,
one.
Chai tea is not a thing. Don't say TT. I mean, say TT because it sounds funny.
Yeah.
But, like, don't say chai tea.
it's like people say
next time,
ATM
like-
machine. And you're like,
Oh.
automatic teller machine.
Next
Next time
Yeah.
I go to Starbucks, I'm like, hey, nice
yeah.
TTs.
Yeah, exactly. So, that's one way to go about playing a person of color. Second way is if you really are convinced that there is something about, like, a race that you want to explore as a character. That's good. And, like, that's the thing that we want you to do carefully and thoughtfully. So, like, please do your research. Please don't let that research be, like, a couple of episodes of The Wire, no matter how good it is.
Yeah.
Like,
or even all of The Wire.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like understand that once again, like entertainment's going to have an inherent bias. Look
Right.
for things made by those groups of people.
Look,
And
own
see not
voices.
only
own
how they are-
voices is huge.
Right.
Exactly. It's the difference between self-conception and how media chooses to portray a given group.
Right.
But do it with that understanding, and I think you'll be really good at avoiding some of the things that, like, you clocked for yourself. So we're
Yeah.
not here to like drag you for that.
Yeah.
Like,
No,
yeah.
I'm like, thank you so much for putting this in because, like, I think a lot of people, and I've encountered this a little bit on the forums before, that people get so paralyzed by the fear of doing something wrong they like won't try.
yeah.
And like, we all fuck up.
Yeah.
I fuck up. My
Yeah.
panelists don't fuck up. They're perfect, but like, I fuck up.
Never
Like,
will
it's-
not.
But like, it's human. We're
Yeah.
cool. We're all growing. We're on a journey. But like, if you're too afraid to take that first step, then like, we're stuck in the races.
Right.
But I
Past.
think it also has to do with be okay with taking criticism, especially if it's constructive.
Yes.
And also, if you're a person of color, be okay with somebody making some mistakes and talking to them about
Right.
it.
I love you. I will say it is not
It's
for
not your
people
responsibility.
of color to constantly correct.
Yes.
It's not your
'Cause,
responsibility.
Yeah, like at the
I
end of the
agree.
day, my one warning for you, as someone who is like a lot of white people's black friends,
Yes.
that it's never just one person asking
Oh,
you.
God, no.
It's
Yeah.
the sum of 100,000 microaggressions and questions that like you have no idea what my personal
Yeah.
headspace is at any point, and like the emotional bandwidth involved in carefully navigating your feelings to explain something to you that you probably haven't heard before and don't want to feel bad about is a hard thing. Please don't ask your people of color and
Yes.
like
Yeah, and
Yeah.
also like, I mean, on the
So,
same in the
to
same
do.
vein as that, like, I mean, if you have somebody who like you trust and like have that kind of relationship with, and you ask and you say, hey, is it okay? Do you have the spoons right now
yes.
to kind of like help me with this as I try to navigate this? And they say yes, great. If they say no, do not pester them about it. They don't have the time, they don't have the energy.
Right.
And
like
never
they
ever-
shouldn't have to.
Yeah.
But like then Google is your friend.
Yes.
Yeah.
And like there are so many Own Voices books out
Right.
there right now.
So
But like
many.
also
Yep.
And there's-
but if they do say something to you unasked for, listen.
Yep.
Just shh and listen for a second and then breathe and try to tamp down on that automatic defense response
Yeah.
and just kind of take it in what it's offered, that it is a huge like emotional investment of bandwidth, and that all of these people of color, like, we all have to navigate how we speak and be ever conscious of white feelings when we walk the world, so that if your friend has come to you and said, hey, what you did here is hurtful, maybe it hurt me personally, or maybe I just feel like it's really not okay, or like you're really walking a fine line here, maybe pull it back some. Take that in the spirit that it's offered, that like this is a thing of love that somebody has told you.
Yeah.
Because they have really like gone out on a limb. So be open to that.
and also
I feel like I just taught the whole tone
Never-
room down.
when you're discussing this subject with someone of color, and this has happened to me a lot, I'm not here to give you permission. Never phrase it in a way that you want permission for something.
Yeah.
Okay. Always try to phrase it in a way of like, I don't know what to think about this because I have no perspective. Can you help me?
Yeah.
Because that's one of the trigger things for me is like, most of my friends are white, and they ask me blah blah blah, and I'm like, look, I'm not going to give you permission to be racist, dude. It's like, I didn't mean it that way. I know you didn't, dog, but you need to quill that shit right now.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, we're not here to give you permission to be racist, and we're never going to give it to you. So,
We're going to tell you it's okay.
Yep.
It's not okay.
Yeah.
Even if we say
just
it's
not.
okay,
It's
is
not
okay.
okay. We're probably just trying to get out of the conversation
Yeah.
because you've made us
Exactly.
uncomfortable.
Yeah. And we're maybe afraid for our safety.
Yeah. Fun fact. If you are given feedback from a person of color or some like population distinct to your own, and your initial instinct after hearing the feedback is to justify and like make it seem like you go, like if your reaction is, uh-oh, I've done an oopsie and I have to make it okay right now verbally, swallow it. Simply say, okay, that's something to think about, and move along. Because what you're going to be asking for next is to be made to feel okay about this thing. And like 99% of the time, it's just like if you just go off and think about it and process it, you'll have something more interesting to add later. But nothing in that moment is going to happen anything other than you trying to like deal with like the social awkwardness there, and all of that becomes bandwidth being asked of the person of color to
Or
like make
or
you
the,
feel better and
oh,
safe again.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
They'll like, you know, oh, please forgive me, please forgive me.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
Yeah.
don't do that. And because the only way to really fix that is to alter your behavior.
Yes.
Yep. That's cool.
And verbal forgiveness is pointless.
Cool. Like you can literally just be like, oh, noted. Move along with your day.
Move on.
Like you're cool. It's not the first time that person's been asked that. It's not the last. And if they're willing to talk to you about it, like you're cool. So you're good.
Yeah.
So just assume you're still good and move on. But thank you. I think this is a really good question.
That's a very
So-
This is really fantastic.
yeah.
Thank you very
Sweet.
much.
All right.
All right. I guess I'll read the last one.
Yas.
Even though,
Gaming group and a lack of diversity from Eric in New Jersey. What up, Jers?
yo,
Hello, Abria, and the rest of the happy.
Sorry, I got to call out, and I'm really very happy.
I know you were doing an episode about people of color in gaming, and I am writing you because I am terrified I am some sort of passive racist piece of shit. When Kimmy announced this episode on version 27 of the forums, I was excited because I have fond memories of gaming with people of color back in my youth until we started moving away. I also game with a variety of people from the LGBTQ community in my LARP, and I thought I was doing good. Part of the reason I love Happy Jacks is the representation across many spectrums. Then,
That's us.
That's us. Then I
There's
realized
4 of us today.
Yeah.
everyone I game with is white. This in some ways horrifies me because I never thought about this before, when I probably should have noticed. Just like it has been recently pointed out that that my NPC representation lacks variety. I don't know what to do. I can't make another group because my wife will kill me in my sleep if I do that. I don't have room in my current 2 groups. Do I make room and run heavy? Do I just wait to see if a group dissolves? And when I make a new group, be more conscious of it? I am lost and afraid, Jackers. Please help. May the dice ever roll in your favor. Eric from New Jersey. Eric from NJ on the forums.
Cool. I'm just gonna say, Eric, my dude, who said my name, so we're best friends now. Unless you're secretly burning crosses on people's lawns, I don't think you're racist.
Yeah, you're
So
good.
just let's allay that fear and then cover
Yes.
positive steps. Who's got something?
It sounds like the sort of second option here.
The one
is-
that doesn't get you shaked by your wife
Yes,
in your sleep.
we don't want you to ruin your wife
Or your
life,
sheets.
or your sheets or whatever. Is
We
this
don't
all
want to
bad?
force your wife to ruin your sheets
Yes.
and then ruin her life.
Yeah.
So yes, the next time you form a group, be conscious of it. Do the work, reach out to people, use the forums, I suppose, as
Yeah.
well, or other groups, Facebook groups or whatever. If you don't know anyone sort of naturally, to find someone, or even, and it's a little crazy, just asking someone that you think is cool, who is a person of color, if they might want to join your thing.
Yes.
And if they say, I don't do that, say, maybe you could try and have fun.
Yeah.
And then try to make it fun for them.
Yeah.
Whatever you do, don't approach them and say, "Hey, I don't have any. All I got is white people." And,
I'm not
and
gonna lie, if
looking
I
for-
got that, I would die. I'd be like, I'm here for you.
Yeah, I got,
Come with me. I'll reverse Underground Railroad you too, Black Gamers.
It is-
Maybe
it
that's
is
a business
true that,
idea.
like-
People of color will play in your D&D game. We'll assign you
Hire
one.
me.
I have approached other people of color, be like, all I got is white people,
Same.
and I need support. But in terms of like when you're trying to diversify your group, like look for cool people who are also people of color. If you don't have any in your immediate friend circle, and that happens a lot, it happens a lot more than people think. I actually recently met a girl who did not meet a person who was not white until she was 20. Wow. And moved out of her hometown in the United States.
Yeah.
So
Oh boy.
it happens.
Yeah, for
it's
sure.
not a
This
big deal.
century?
Like I just
Eric
met
clearly lives in that town.
like maybe we should talk about the
Idaho?
racist history of Oregon, but
we don't have to.
no.
We're good.
Not
That's
today.
That's a whole other series.
It's like a drow episode. We'll get there later.
But I'm just saying, like, go to your local gaming shops.
Conventions?
If you have any
Yes.
conventions, obviously you're in New Jersey, but like people who might be in like more smaller, towns and things like that. Like where I grew up, we had one shop, but the upshot of that was literally everyone had to go there.
Yep.
Yeah.
So if you put up a post, like, do they have a bulletin board or something like that you can post up that you're looking for people? Do not say you're looking for people of color once again, but like, just say you're looking for like, new people to fill in like a new group, like that kind of stuff, or just like go hang out and like kind of open your eyes to see like new people who are around and like make some friends.
Yeah.
Diversify your friend circle.
I was just
Exactly.
going to say that. I was going to say, like, take a look to diversify your friend circle, to look for gamers of color at your shop, and just, ask them to just be your friend and hang out and talk about gaming, so that when the next time you're forming a group, it becomes obvious, like, oh, I should ask Brian because he's cool and we haven't played together yet.
Exactly.
And then there's online gaming. There are also online tabletop RPG conventions.
Yeah.
Kind of like, the Happy Jacks.
Like the Happy Jacks.
Yeah.
RPG convention that's coming up.
JackerCon.
JackerCon.
Yeah.
May
22nd through
29th.
29th.
It's a thing we all just knew. And
That
it
was
wasn't
just
whispered to
boom.
us.
Completely unprompted. That was pretty wicked cool.
At happyjacks.org/forum.
We're definitely not getting fed all of this information.
Amy's here.
I think one of the things we're glossing over here is gaming shouldn't be your impetus to diversify your group of friends.
Yeah.
You should just do that. Just go out and meet fun people. June 22nd to 29th. That's all right.
Who said May? No
one.
said May.
No one said
No
that.
one said that. Nope.
But you're definitely making a super. Sorry, I'm gonna jump in really quick. You're making a super cogent point. Like, yeah, I mean, if we're being super honest, I will say that like there are not very many people of color in this community. We exist because there's 4 of us, and that's not all of us.
4.
That's not
is
all
most
of
of
us
us.
in Happy Jacks.
Yeah.
I'm kidding. But yeah, it is harder to find. There's also like a lot of other like societal things that make us want to seek out games with each other because they're safer spaces. So like there's a whole lot of reasons. Like I'm not trying to make you feel better and make you not feel like a bad, like just so you know, like it's a process. And start off by like I really like the idea of introducing new people to the hobby.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So if you have a friend that's a person of color that's like, what is Dungeons and Dragons? That is some nerd shit. And you're like, yeah, it is. Check this out. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, everyone likes
Or like,
fiction
who
and
doesn't
like
want to do
seeing
a Monster
themselves.
of the Week? Like,
Yeah.
who's your dude who's like, hey, did you check out last week's episode of Grimm? I know Grimm's not on the air anymore, but like,
What?
Grimm?
Is that a thing?
You went to
Why is that your
Grimm?
poll?
I don't know.
Not even Game of Thrones?
Yeah,
Grimm?
what? You can have
It was
her.
Monster
We'll
of the
ship her to
Week.
New Jersey.
It was a Monster of the Week reference. Game of Thrones is not Monster of the Week, but I'm just saying.
I'm not judging.
Like,
Buffy.
I'm not going to Buffy anymore. Like, if I could get like another non-emotionally stunted, incredibly like toxic relationship
Whoa.
heroine, like if I could just get out of that bubble forever, I'd be really happy. So I don't go to Buffy anymore. As much as I loved Buffy in the 90s, like, it's 20 motherfucking 19, and we deserve better.
Never watched Buffy.
Whoa.
So. All right,
Wow.
that was a lot of feelings.
That
I
was a
feel like
lot.
I should get my drow rant now,
Yep.
but like I won't. Continue.
Before we move on,
Yeah.
I just want to
You're
say
good.
one other thing that we sort of like skipped over in your
Yeah.
letter that I want to commend you for and say continue to do more of. Diversify your game in NPCs.
Yes.
Yes.
Diversify your game in your
Shoot.
characters. If you
call.
don't have people of color at your table, that's fine. Just make sure they exist in a world with people of color and that like it comes up and it's a part of the storytelling and you're dealing with it, because that will also make it way more comfortable for the person of color who eventually joins your table, or when you have a game with a person of color in it.
We
Totally.
spent thousands of years making shitty things normalized. Let's try to normalize some of the cool stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was talking.
And you've already made those first steps. Like,
You're
are
asking the right
already
questions.
thinking, like, and you're already thinking about your NPCs, and like you're in a group with like an LGBTQ plus, like, open, diverse group that way. Then it's just a matter of like it's just like learning to open your eyes a little bit more in a different way. So like that's awesome. You're taking those first steps. So don't feel like you're some passive racist piece of shit. You're not. People tend to have certain social groups that they gravitate towards. It happens.
And one last thing, doing racial Pokemon in your game because you got to catch them all is also racist.
Huh?
Just saying. It's like I have
don't
an
even
Asian, I have a black.
Oh yeah, no.
Tokenism. So,
Tokenism.
not that you probably, like, since you're the homie and have been around a lot of these conversations, you probably don't need tips, but for anyone that's listening that, like, hasn't gotten any good tips on, like, diversifying your NPCs, a recommendation I gave a friend recently was go to, like, I don't know if you care about Pinterest, but, like, create a list of all of your favorite actors. Wheedle them down to people of color. Now, like, fan cast those people as your NPCs. So now when you're describing people that you have, like, a very strong sense of in your own brain.
Yes, and
So.
let me.
I mean, and you don't really have to tell everyone that all of your male NPCs are fan casters at Elba, but like, it doesn't
Yeah.
hurt.
But you're going to make a lot of people happy if you do.
Thank you. I haven't gotten a bad response to that yet.
Yes, but I do also want to say when you do that exercise, if you write down your list of your favorite actors and it's all white people,
Yeah.
take note of that and
Yes.
maybe also expand the media you consume and like look up, Tessa Thompson because she's also white.
Oh my
God.
And
Also,
so
I mean,
if
you
they
know,
all look like Idris Elba and Tessa Thompson, again, no one will be unhappy.
Thank you.
Literally no one.
I will also add Louis Tan because.
Michael B. Jordan.
Okay, we could do this forever about cute people of color.
John Cho, Dream
Yeah.
Daddy.
Oh, he is my
Arjun
dream daddy.
Gupta.
You know Oscar Isaacs.
Yeah.
He's small, but I'll fuck him up. Sorry, what? I'm horny on Maine and should not be moderating this. So also, describe your white NPCs as white and see how that feels. Because if you notice
yes.
you're doing it a bunch, that's also like a motivator and a driver to change.
Yes.
Don't normalize white NPCs. Just if you describe everyone and you realize you're saying the same thing a lot, your brain will naturally want to like change that shit up.
And like, actually, this brings up a really like interesting thing that I noticed when I was reading the last Peter Grant book. Like, this is on novels, so not necessarily, but his the main character of the Peter Grant novels by Ben Aronovich is half black. I think it's Sierra Leone, but like, don't quote me on that. I'm terrible with names. But he. And a thing I noticed, like, specifically in the last book, and I kind of, like, flipped through some of the older ones, is, like, he only describes the race of white people. And it was, like, interesting and telling and a little, like, it, like, shifted my balance of thought
Yeah.
in a very interesting, subtle way.
Yeah.
That, like, I mean, yes, he talks about, like, his family and stuff like that, like the main character's family and other, where it's obvious that other people are people of color, but he doesn't describe their race. He only says when people are white.
Yeah. It's an interesting idea of like othering a culture that has been normalized to see themselves constantly.
Yes.
Also, if you are curious about how to accurately describe people of color in games in ways that aren't like definitely filtered through a white lens, look up good fiction written by people of color.
Yes.
If we're doing Rex, I want to also recommend N.K. Jemisin's Broken Earth trilogy. Yeah, it's
Yep.
really good, and there's a really fun diversity of like physical descriptions, so you know that like just about everyone in the game, like or in the game, in the book is a person of color, but they're described in interesting ways that aren't like the same like russet toned or dusky.
Dusky.
I hate dusky so much.
Raven has become one of my least favorite things. But there's so many, like, go out and, like, especially in the world of science fiction and fantasy, there are so many, and I'm not going to get started because Lord knows I won't stop.
Yeah.
There's so many great authors of color. I actually had like a whole Twitter thread that I'm going to resurrect and add to now.
Do it.
About authors of color, like series that I really enjoyed, and just underrepresented in general. Like, so seek out like in your media, like Jay said.
Yep.
Yeah, TV shows like Cloak and Dagger,
Oh,
That's a great
so good,
bazinga.
so fucking good.
I know a guy who writes on that.
Oh man, Let's
Really, that
get
book's amazing.
Can't tell if it's like part of the bit or not. Sorry. Cool. Anyone? Anything else to add?
No.
Okay. Do we have time for our?
I think we should have time for a good
Yeah.
scenario, right?
Yeah.
All right. Can I read that one, y'all?
Yes.
Of course.
Sweet. Good scenario for first-time players from Bobcat. Greetings and all right, I quit. I messed up one word and I'm done here. Jim, you finish.
Damn.
Greetings and felicitations from the Great White North. Given your current opinions on gaming, what would you consider to be a good scenario for first-time GM to run? Would you incorporate WotC's 3 pillars of role-playing games: exploration, interaction, and combat? Do you consider these aspects to be necessary, or do you disagree with the terms? Would you recommend any commercially available adventures for a first-timer? If not, how would you guide the beginning GM in preparing their own first adventure right up to make the effort go as smoothly as possible? Cheers and beers, Bobcat.
Cool. I'm going to jump in because I actually wanted to answer the question first, which is why I passed off reading it.
Damn.
One, quick note. WotC, Wizards of the Coast, the people that make Dungeons & Dragons. Just for people who don't know, because
Right.
you said that and my brain went, what is what?
I did not
And
know
I
that.
knew what it was, and I was
Sorry.
confused. No, you're good.
That's a total industry term. And,
Yeah, he's deep in the cut, y'all. So, I'm going to sidestep recommendations in this regard and say if you want to build something yourself, the thing I like to do is ask a would-be game runner to think of their 3 pieces of fiction that they like the most, try to make one of them the most obscure thing you know, and build a scenario off of that. Because like the triangulation off of 3 types of tropes means you're not like going in going, oh, we're playing Harry Potter, or we're just playing Harry Potter. You might also be like hitting these notes and beats that like some people at your table haven't seen, and you can totally pass off as your own invention. Yeah. So yeah, I like the 3 pillars. You can like, but they shouldn't be in equal measure. They should be what your priorities are first, and then what your players' priorities are second, because you're only going to be as interested in the game as like the things that you're passionate about. It's my favorite Patrick Rothfuss thing is like writers write what they like about. So like Tolkien loved languages so much.
So many languages.
Yeah.
And songs.
Yeah, exactly.
Apparently. Lots and lots
So
of
many songs.
There's nothing
Yeah.
wrong with that.
Not that there's anything wrong with that. But that was what he was interested in. That was what he was interested in, so he wrote a bunch about it. Patrick Rothfuss likes currency. So if you read, what is it, Kingkiller, it's like a lot of coin stuff. So care about the thing you care about, and trust that your enthusiasm will like float your players through some of that, but then also include the other pillars.
Food porn,
Yeah.
as we were talking about earlier
Oh,
with
yeah.
Songs of Fire and
Song
Ice.
of Fire Ice is all, I was going to say, that is all about the food. And what people wear.
Yeah. I'm into that.
So much cloth of gold.
I was like, somebody
Yes!
was like, oh, these multi-page descriptions of penguins, and I was like, yes, tell me more.
Yeah,
Yes.
I read them in my bathtub.
Rashers
Think
of
sultry
bacon.
thoughts. Yeah. Oh my god. Black bread burnt. Ugh.
Oh, no, I'm hungry.
Right? Sorry. Go ahead. Anyone?
There's a lot going into this, and since you mentioned Wizards of the Coast and 3 pillars of role-playing games, I'm assuming that you're playing Dungeons and Dragons.
He said with shade.
No,
there was a little-
I'm
there
just
was a
making.
little
There was
shade.
a little, but that because
I stand D&D.
What I-
We'll fight about this.
what I want to say is that you used the word scenario, which means to me that it's an encounter. which is that what a scenario means to me. It's a single encounter, not an overarching story. Because there are two jobs for a GM in Dungeons & Dragons. There's a balance of gameplay for an actual scenario or conflict, where your monsters have to be tough enough to be challenging, but not so bad they're going to kill you. And there's math and stuff that goes into that. There's a different level of preparedness you have as a GM for that. And then there's also the creation of the story and the adventure that the party's going to go through. There are a lot of great introductory scenarios, which are combat scenarios, that come in. And if you want to look at those, talk to anybody that runs the Wednesday Adventurers League games, because there are people that literally do nothing but write balanced scenarios for certain levels of characters. And then there's also the factor of if you have somebody that's like, it's a party of 3 wizards and a cleric, you're going to balance it differently for a party of 2 rogues, a warrior, and a paladin. Because the game is technical and requires that kind of preparation. Now, if you're talking about coming up with an introductory story arc, I highly recommend that you sit down with your table and you sort of create a world for yourselves instead of using something out of the box, especially if you're introducing people to a game. There's a certain person I know that's actually developing a product that uses tarot cards to create sort of like a session 0 for your world.
It's Kimmy. I'm sorry.
It's called Decima.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun.
It's
a lot
so
of fun.
good.
And you can use games like Microscope for that too. There's a lot of different things that you can use for that
Only
kind of world.
Decima.
Decima is the only one.
I'm
There
so
can be
sorry.
only one, and it is Decima.
Sorry.
There you go. It is the highest of high and the holiest of holies. But
At goldenlassogames.com. Sign up for the newsletter.
indeed, I'm interested. But when you're introducing people to these type of games, it's very easy. You can always just pull out Temple of Elemental Evil. It's supposed to be level 1 to whatever, and you can do it from the beginning to the end. But I think
And you
that
get like a really great throwback vibe.
yeah.
Because it's the Temple of Elemental Evil.
Come on. You can go into a bunch of the other ones with the fire giants and the drow and all that cool stuff. But it's all part of a series. But in any case, you can just get something off the shelf. But I find when you're introducing people to role playing, especially if you have a little bit more experience than they do, it's such a great idea to get them fully vested in your game world and get them creating things from the get-go. Because there's a tendency when you're running modules for a certain amount of passivity from your player characters, where they'll just want to get fed information and then just give feedback when they're fed information. Mm-hmm. When you have something
I
that's
do that player.
yeah, I do that. Exactly. But versus when you start getting people involved in creating the world and their characters, then you get much more of a yes and vibe at your table and people wanting to be actively creative at it. So I highly recommend that if you're doing
And
a session 0.
I think in terms of, I don't have any experience jamming, so this is all from a player's perspective. That the most important thing for me, like when I was a new player, even now when I come into new systems, is like that buy-in that you have around the table. Like more than any specific scenario or anything like that, like things that are easier for first-time players. D&D 5e has actually made it very, very beginner friendly.
Yeah, it's super good.
And that's
It is
great.
fantastic.
But like, I'll stand PBTA all day, every day. There are so many systems. Monster Hearts is a great one. I think they do like a Monster of the Week kind of deal in there.
Well, there's
in their
Monster of the
book.
Week. There's a game
And,
called
okay,
Monster
so
of the
there's
Week.
Monster of the Week, and I'm just
Definitely.
getting things confused, but whatever.
No, you're good. You said it perfectly. Nothing was wrong.
Nothing
What are you talking about?
Nothing is wrong. I never make mistakes. So, but yeah, stuff like that, where you have like little scenarios and little like mini one-off sessions that are built in to kind of whet your player's appetite. And the other thing that can do is open up their minds to playing in a system. And so if you do like a one-off or a 2-session game rather than attempting to construct an arc from start to finish on your first try, you can get a feel for your players, they can get a feel for you, and you can figure out what kind of stuff works and what doesn't work for y'all as you move through that in kind of a lower stakes environment. And then when you move into like, you kind of figure out the things that your players are interested in and what you're interested in as you move through that like smaller world, And then that translates into a bigger world. And hey, you could even tie in what happened in that one shot, like, to the larger world. And who doesn't love a callback?
Totally.
Exactly.
Nice.
Similarly, I don't have a lot of experience as a GM. I'll say as a player, what I like are having options.
Yeah.
Having you go this way or you go this way. And, like, really letting us sort of fumble around and figure things out. And also even, like, be prepared for the third option.
Yes.
For, you know, those weird, willful gamers who are just going to be like, we don't go either of those ways. What's over that hill over there?
Yeah.
That never happens. No.
No.
It definitely
And
does
so-
not happen every game, every
All the time,
Exactly.
But
forever.
God, you know what somebody should do that would be so much fun and also lead to all the death is if somebody adapts kind of a choose your own adventure game to a role-playing arc. Because how much fucking fun would that be? Where, like, you're just, like, you don't know necessarily, but, like, if you pull up a really old choose your own adventure book and, like, kind of use that as a template for making your first game,
That's a pretty good
everybody will
idea.
be dead really fast,
Yeah.
so you don't have to worry about, like, making several sessions.
I don't know what you're talking about. Every time I've ever read a Choose Your Own Adventure, I read from
The
I
back
hold my-
to the front.
I hold my thumb on my previous
I
choice,
just-
so I've never
I
died.
just always make the right choice every time.
Exactly.
I've never. I always.
No, I never
do.
pulled the
even
floppy
die?
disk out of my Commodore 64 so it wouldn't save the fact that I died in Wizardry.
Yep.
And then put it back in and started that level over again.
So
Never
whatever
did
you're
that
talking about
whatsoever.
sounds cool and interesting,
Yeah,
but I've
yes,
never
for
heard of
other
or
people.
experienced
I
it.
mean, if you for lesser beings who make mistakes,
Yeah, indeed.
because I definitely didn't find one of the three good endings and
Yep.
then work my way backwards from there.
Yes.
Smart.
Just Memento.
Yeah.
I haven't
Yes.
seen Memento,
Yes.
so I just use that wrong all the time.
No, it's actually really
Oh,
appropriate
yeah.
here.
Sweet, but I really like that, like all of those ideas.
One thing I want to add to this is that when you start a game, you're starting a conversation, and the tenor of that conversation is set at the beginning of that. So what you have, your main responsibility at the GM to get that ball rolling is to set the theme and get everybody around the same feel and concept of what game you all want to run. And that may not be the game you want to run. They might go off and go in another direction. You have to be okay with that.
Congratulations to, like, we're gonna open a bank.
Exactly.
I have played in that game. It's so weird.
Weird.
I love it.
It was really
like,
fun.
working
Gonna
with
start our own
them and
cupcake
like
business.
making and throwing like random crazy ass shit their way, like when they think they've gotten one over on you in a fun and like exciting new direction way rather than an antagonistic way, because that is one thing in terms of like first time players and first time GMs. I know people do enjoy it, but personally, I never have an antagonistic relationship between the GM and the players. It's
Yeah, I
very
can't
sad
stand
to
that.
me.
No.
No, I've played in a lot of those kind of D&D games and other, even Shadowrun and other games where it's like, my responsibility is to kill you all or to make things as difficult as possible.
Yeah.
And like, no, your responsibility is to help me tell a fun story.
Yeah.
That's what your responsibility
Or
is.
just, you know, if your group really likes to just like kill all the things and like and then the things that they can't kill and steal their loot, they just, you know, try to sneak past and steal their loot. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've all been there.
Yeah.
Side note, Pooja. Other Doc just informed us via the chat that there's a game called Cheat Your Own Adventure. Yeah,
my
that's
God.
Choose Your Own Adventure, but you like make it up as you like. This
That's
is my
great.
shit. Run that.
Yeah.
Answer the question. Run that thing. That
Just
sounds
run cheat that.
amazing.
Just
Yeah.
do that.
Sounds great.
We're going to be running that.
Yeah. Tune
That
in
sounds
to
great.
One Shot Saturday when we find this game. And
If I don't get to
rock
play
it.
in that, I'm going to be very upset.
You're gonna be there.
Yeah.
So you find one
It's
more
really
person
just
to color,
going to
you'll
be
there.
us.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Literally the amount of lonely hours as a adolescent sitting in the library just reading Choose Your Own Adventure books.
So many
Oh.
so many hours, because I would just get dropped off at Joe's Greek Library and
Yeah.
and I was so happy with that because they had air conditioning and there weren't mosquitoes.
Is she from the South? Yes.
Yes.
I've said y'all like 17 times today. People didn't know I was from the South before. They ain't listening.
Sweet. All right. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap it up. Does anyone
Yeah.
have any closing thoughts for us?
I love you all.
Yay.
We love you.
We love you.
And the most, like, I think one of the overarching things, like, through all of these letters that we talked about, like, is empathy. And really, like, opening yourself up to listen is the most important thing, not just for, in terms of people of color in a gaming space, but in general to make the experience better for everyone. listen.
Actually, just make a better game and then make you a better person.
Yep.
Jim Henson said that listening is the beginning and the ending.
Absolutely.
Right on.
And yeah, going back to what we said before, be comfortable with experimenting. And just if you cock it up, it happens. Like whatever. We all mess up stuff all the time. And that just goes back to if you hear or are suddenly informed that this isn't going the way you thought, listen and move on. It's a game. Like it's just like any game. You just move forward. Consider it like XP. You've learned and are growing.
Yes.
Indeed.
Yes.
Right on.
All right.
It's every day's a struggle to become a better person.
No closing thoughts from
I've got
Jay.
no. You guys said all the good things. I said I ran out of good. I don't have good things to say.
Go watch Cloak and Dagger.
Go
That's
watch Cloak and Dagger.
Yes.
No, I knew how to do the ending part. I only was gonna mess up the top part. Cool.
Ease
All
up,
right.
coach.
She's just like Rudy carrying me through this because I'm bad at it. So before we wrap up, where can we find everyone? I want to hype our stuff because we are a beautiful unicorn commodity in the community.
Well, you can find me on Twitter at +10 to awesome, and also I'll be running Small Game Hunter. It's the last Saturday of every month where we explore small indie story and RPG games. And next time we will be playing Praxis, which is a GM-less role-playing game by Jim Pinto. And also coming up is Strategicon, our GameX convention. Go ahead and check that out at strategicon.net. It's super fun.
Not just fun, but super.
It's super fun.
It's so fun.
No, seriously, it's every kind of gaming you can possibly imagine under one roof for practically 3 days straight.
Yep.
So, seriously, if you like RPGs, board games, video games, war games, collectible card games, any kind of game you like, come over here and check it out. It's super fun.
When is it?
and Happy Jacks also has a live podcast from there, and they do live APs.
Yeah.
Which means that you can watch and be an active participant in this tomfoolery.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
And Jim's not going to say this is Kimmy from off camera, but he runs the whole RPG section of it, so he's like one of the big dogs at that convention.
Yeah.
So.
Nice.
Do not like toot my own horn, but okay.
I'm Pooja.
I'm Jim.
You can find me at LADaisy on Twitter. LADESIGIRL. And don't forget about JaggerCon coming up. It's June 22nd to 29th.
Yes.
And we and several of my other panelists today will actually be starting a wonderful new playthrough or AP of Demigods
That's right.
Oh,
Starting
God, what a great game.
this Sunday at 4 p.m. PST if you are on the Twitches, and if not, it comes whenever the magic of that happens. I don't understand how scheduling works.
Totally.
You can find me on the Twitters at jholtham, HOLTHAM. Yes, I will be here at Happy Jacks Saturday evenings with Scum and Villainy.
Yes.
And then Sunday afternoons with Demigods as well. So super exciting. And as came up, I write for Cloak and Dagger, Marvel's Cloak and Dagger, airing right now. Second season is airing right now on Freeform, Thursdays at 8. And also on Hulu forever and ever and ever.
So good.
Don't you have like a cool read through happening right now too?
Oh yeah, and I've got a reading coming up on April 30th of a play, on April 28th and 30th of a play what I wrote called Snakeskin Suit at the Pico Playhouse. You can find out more about that at Bespoke Plays on the Twitter, at Bespoke Plays.
So
Awesome.
sweet. And,
Oh, and also don't forget Wild Wild Talents
yeah.
every other Wednesday, which is
Yeah.
freaking awesome. That Kimmy runs.
Nice. Sweet. And I'm Abria. You can find me on the internet at Quiddy. On Happy Jacks, you can find me. My finale of Dragon Heist is going to be next Monday.
Oh.
Yeah, we're dragging them to the end. We will successfully get through this campaign.
I mean, well, you'll get through the campaign. One way or another, it's ending.
Yep. Along with Demigods every other Wednesday that isn't Wild Wild Talents, you guys can catch me on The Autumn People, which is Tappy's game with all of the Chronicles of Darkness splats all together, and I'm playing
All the splats.
a snackromancer, like a chubby little mage. I had a really bad migraine this last Wednesday, but I will be there and back, and it'll be wonderful. Also, in May 17th to 19th, you'll actually catch me at D&D Live.
Nice.
Yeah, I got the call. So I will actually be running, I'm DMing there, so I'll be
Nice.
running a bunch of their epic tier games. So
Nice.
catch me there. I will probably be dressed like a giant tiefling. So if you see a very tall tiefling, like, say, what's up? Sorry. Race, cool stuff.
Nice.
Yeah. Anyway, and Saving Throw show, I'm guessing next Friday, so you can catch me there too. So yeah, bunch of stuff. Thank you so much for joining us for the
Thank y'all.
volume 1 of Jock Jams, which is what I'm calling this
That's
now.
Jock Jams.
Hell
This is
yeah.
All right.
And if you'll have, like, once again, I'm just going to plug happyjacksrpg@gmail.com or the Happy Jacks forums. happyjacks.org/forum. Come talk to us. We are here. Not necessarily at your beck and call, but at least, like, I want to hear your experiences. Please give them to me.
Not only that, but you'll find that there's a bunch of extra content for some APs on the forums as well that
Totally.
you might find entertaining too. So there's a bunch of neat stuff to find. There's content on the Happy Jacks channel.
And don't forget to listen and subscribe on the podcast and like leave comments because that's how we get bumped up the feed. So everyone has to listen to us. Everyone.
All the peoples.
All right. I think that's it. Bye, guys.
Bye.
We're listeners of Happy Jack's RPG podcast. We get all our game news from douchebags galore. With reckless abandon, we pursue this a hobby from Michigan to Australia.